So, okay, so in your group, what we're going to do is we're going to choose an activity. So you can choose any activity sports skill. So throwing baseball, shooting basketball, whatever comes to mind. Choose your skill, perform an analysis. So analyze the movement through each of the phases. So the preparatory phases, we talked before, the preparatory, execution, recovery phases, all those 3 phases of movement. So you're going to do an analysis. So basically examine the joints, shoulder girdle, glenohumeral, etc., all the way down through the feet and toes, so all the way through. And this should be hip and knee, not the hip knee joint. So for each phase, so what you're going to do is reference it from anatomical position to the preparatory position, from the preparatory position beginning to where you end up in the execution phase, from the execution phase to where you end up in the recovery phase. So that's how you would perform your analysis. So how does it change from anatomical phase to get into the preparatory phase? How does it change from the preparatory phase to the execution phase? So if we're looking at the glenohumeral joint in a baseball throw, it's that position of in the anatomical position, how do we get to here? So we're looking at that position of what do we get from the shoulders. We're abducted, we're hyperextended, we're externally rotated. In that position, we're looking at those functions of the glenohumeral joint. There's another slide that I'll load up that basically goes through in this position here. So we'll look at analysis of movement. So break it down into phases. And usually there's going to be 3 to 5 phases. So in this position, we think about the stance phase, the preparatory phase, the execution phase, follow-through phase. So how did we arrive at the stance phase? What did we do to anatomical position to get into this position? So let's kind of look at that. How would we arrive there? What did we do in all those joints? And we're thinking about structurally. Let's go down to starting at the top, glenohumeral joint. What is happening? So in this position, the glenohumeral joint, do we have much motion going on? Okay, so how about elbow joint? So we got flexion on both sides. Radial ulnar joint, we really can't see from this position, because, this picture, 1, not large enough, but 2, we can't see the hand position. We're presuming that he's got his hand on top of the ball. So the right side would be what position? Pronated. Left side would be supinated. But it's a little bit of a mid position because he's in this position. Kind of, instead of being here, you usually don't find that. Yeah, here, he's usually in the mid position. So you would call that pronated on both sides. We can't see radiocarpal joint. We can't see the carpal metacarpal joint of the thumb. We can't see the metacarpal phalangeal joints of the fingers and hands. So at that point in time, from a picture, we wouldn't be able to see that. But when you do your analysis, you're going to have the opportunity to do this live with yourselves. So you can stand there and put yourself in that position and then look down on that and say, okay, here's what's happening. In that position, what is happening at all those joints? And then looking at that and saying, okay, now what happens at the hips? So the right side is doing what? The right side is moving into a flexion position and
outward rotation.
External rotation, outward rotation. What else? He's adducted, you could even say he's slightly to the point where he's got a little horizontal flexion there, in that position. So you could say, okay, he's flexed, adducted, or flexed, horizontal flexion and external rotation. How about the left leg at the hip?
Not much going on.
Slight flexion.
Well, is his foot, are both feet flexed in front of him?
No.
Is one standing behind him? Is he in a position where, is he in a straddle stance? So, think about where you would be. If you wanted to stand up, put yourself in that position, where do you find yourself? Is your leg behind you? Is it underneath of you? Are you standing supporting your body weight there, or is your center of mass distributed between your feet? So if your center of mass lies between your feet in the stance phase, what position would his hip be in? So his hip would be kind of in a hyperextension phase because the center of mass is between the foot. If he's in this position balancing his weight between 2 feet, usually his center of mass is going to come somewhere between the front foot toe and the heel of the back foot. Usually it's going to be in that middle of that stance phase. So that's where you're going to have that straddle position in the linear movement, anterior, posterior. So he's going to have one going forward, one going backward, kind of like you do when you're walking. So in that position. What do we see here? Does it look like he's slightly externally rotated at that left hip?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's externally rotated at the left hip. Again, it looks like he could be a little bit of a horizontal extension, foot crossing behind, almost like he's walking a tightrope position. How about the knees? In this position, we don't see it much. It doesn't show really well, but you would presume that he's probably got a little bit of knee flexion. Because I don't see many baseball pitchers that are standing up there with their knees hyperextended or locked out. Usually not a great approach position. So looking at that, what we're going to do is this is our position. So if you think about this, the best way I can tell you to perform your analysis is to actually go through and create a spreadsheet where you're going to list out these various joints, place them in column A, so you can come in and just basically let's, go through this and this. So the easiest way to think about this is just come in here and do this. So then you can come in here and just put all that information here. And then just come through here and create a header row. Insert. And you'd say, so we would do stance phase. So then you have columns here, and you basically say, so then you can come over here and say, okay, what's going on? Put in a humeral joint. Stance face. We can go through the motions, elbow, all the way down. We can look at the different functions there. And then we would come in, basically go backwards and say, okay, so from there, identify the antagonist muscles for the movement. So if we look at this and say, we're doing a total analysis, movements through each phase, examine the movements. We want to go through and say, what is happening here? So complete joint and muscular analysis. So how did we flex the shoulder? What muscles were creating that motion? What muscles created that abduction, external rotation, hyperextension movement of the shoulder? And then looking at that, and then we're going to go through the last phase of the movement, do that for each phase, and then you want to look at that muscular analysis, what's stabilizing the shoulder joint. So if I'm moving the shoulder joint, something has to be supporting the stability of that joint, so how do we create that? And then we look at that and say, okay, the last thing we're going to do is to come down here and identify the agonist muscles for the primary joints involved in the execution phase of the movement. So identify the agonist muscles for the primary joints involved in the execution phase of the movement and select 2 resistance exercises for each of the agonist muscle groups. So if you had something, in this position where it's shoulder, flexors, determine an exercise that develops the agonist muscles in the shoulder flexor. Choose 2 exercises, 2 resistance exercises to do that. Questions?
Is this like a paper format or is it a presentation?
It's a paper format, so you're going to submit it to me electronically. Just email it to me and everything else, because we won't have time to do the presentations last week. We're going to be doing some other stuff, doing some more analysis of movements and doing some video analysis.
So like an essay, just want this.
You can just come back to the spreadsheet and put all that information in there. Just put tab for, put, okay, here's stance phase. We can do, joint analysis, muscular analysis in columns. And then, last tab would be exercises to develop the agonist muscles. So.
You okay with the spreadsheet?
I'm totally fine with that. I mean, I'm going to look at the totality of your work. It's not going to be how you present it to me that's going to be my grading element. It's going to be, did you investigate this? Did you perform the analysis to the right level? Because this is really what you're going to be looking at doing. Is like, okay, if we're examining the baseball pitch and we want to go back and see how do we really get into this position and show that movement, what are we doing? How do we determine what's the most appropriate way to develop that skill? If you're looking at, say, okay, we want to improve someone's performance at the baseball pitch, what exercises can we do that are going to be the most beneficial? And this is just one phase of where we're looking at doing the agonist function. We could say, if you've got a pitcher who has problems stabilizing, what would your, choose 2 stabilizing muscle exercises? So maybe we would do, a movement where we're doing something to recruit the stabilizing musculature and, doing those exercises. So we would do like a, the shoulder rotator movements that they do for, baseball pitchers, things like that. So this is really an applied function of what you would be doing with the material that this class presents. Questions?
Right and left side?
Right and left side, yes. So if you're looking at the left side, what are we going to be doing with the left side of the body as we're throwing the baseball? Usually it's kind of a counterbalance move. but we do have movements with that. So if we actually looked at that and said, okay, if we don't have that motion, does the baseball pitch become as effective? So if we don't have this counterbalancing movement with the forward arm, is the pitch as effective? Are we able to do that?
And is each person in the group doing their own analysis of their own,
You're going to do a joint analysis. So this is going to be a group effort.
so just one person is doing this movement and we're all analyzing the same?
Yeah, so you can each go through it. I would recommend that as you go through this, each of you mimic this by doing the movement, because it really, that's where you connect up with the function, is if you can feel, okay, I maybe can't see, the hand position, but if I put myself in there, I can feel the hand position. So the value of connecting to that movement becomes more complete if you actually replicate it yourself, And it doesn't, it's not like we're gonna have, I'm not requiring you to videotape everybody doing this movement, but, if you can go in there and each person in your group can, work together, one may be serving as a model while the other one's typing down the information, and, then you can rotate, maybe you pick, one person does each different segment. If you've got 3 people in the group, you can do preparatory, execution, recovery phase, somebody can be responsible for each element, so I'm not gonna say how you should or how you shouldn't break it out, but, I want to make this, something where it's an experience that you learn from, but also something that you can see how much did we really engage in to develop this, so instead of looking at that and saying, okay, let's just, do this major presentation, I want you to look at this so that it's not gotta be the most, catastrophic assignment that's gonna take hours and weeks to perform, but you come in next Thursday and Friday, next Wednesday and Thursday, you could get together in a group, you could go through the movement that you wanna do, and you can perform that and say, okay, now, how do we get here? How do we get here? How do we get here? Is there a stance phase or something else that changes that position? And then look at, those elements, because in this position, I will upload these slides so you can actually go through here and, basically do the phase naming. Go through and say, what does that fit the sports terminology, is it, the wind-up phase versus the preparatory phase? It may make more sense to say that it's the preparatory phase can be broken into, the early cocking and late cocking phase. You could go that level if you want to, but I would say if you want to just stick with the 3 basic phases, what happens in the preparatory phase, what happens in the execution phase, what happens in the recovery phase, I'm fine with that, because I'm going to be able to look at that and say, okay, you start here, you end here, looking at your movements, and assessing that. And some movements may be that it's just, decreasing an amount of flexion, or, it's, continuing flexion. So in that position, we may be having a forward flexion in the recovery phase of the baseball pitch. So we see down here, it's still flexion of the shoulder, but what's happening to the muscles? When we look at the muscular analysis, it's gonna be, is it concentric, or does it now become eccentric? That's usually where we determine the position here at the end of the execution phase, the beginning of the recovery phase, is when we go from concentric force producing to eccentric. So we basically shift the roles. We now stick everything from being the agonist creating the motion to the antagonist recovering the motion. So your muscular analysis will probably be a little bit more involved than will be your joint analysis. Joint
We don't
analysis.
really talk about the muscles much, so that feels a little.
So that's why we're going to spend some time going through. That's what next Tuesday's for, and that's what we're going to spend some time. The latter part of this week and early part of the remaining time is going to be spent going through this movement. So when we look at that, what happens in that situation? In the stance phase, describe what's going on. This is a great example of how to do that, analysis. What happens in the preparatory phase. The wind up, we're looking at use to lengthen the appropriate muscles so they're in a position to generate more force and momentum. So as we do that, what's happening? Well, I'm stretching the anterior musculature, am I concentrically contracting that? No. So how does it do that? In order for me to create that stretch, I have to contract the muscle on the opposite side of the joint. So this is really when we start thinking about, how do we become more dynamic? How do we become more integrated into the analysis rather than just being a stiff stoic, here's a picture, here's what I see. Because, the joint analysis is really the first step. And that's where we start everything. So, when you look at it and say, okay, how do we assess that range of motion? And I don't expect you to say, oh, okay, we moved another 20 degrees range of motion. I don't need that much detail. It's just, you can say it's continuing through flexion, or, it's, starting to reduce the, speed of flexion, if we're talking about recovery phase. We look at the movement phase, it's the execution or acceleration phase. This is where we really sum up. This is where we're choosing the exercises. So if we looked at the movement phase of a baseball, the primary joints used in the baseball pitch are what? Where are our primary agonists in developing the force of the pitch in baseball?
Elbow.
Well, it's going to be, is it the elbow that creates the force in baseball?
Shoulder.
If we think about it, it's mostly in the shoulder. The elbow is acting as a lever. The elbow doesn't really, it's not that, terminal extension that creates a lot of the force on the pitch. Most of the time, that comes later in the contribution, but the primary is the shoulder, but what else? What else really creates the largest part of the force of movement?
Push off.
It's the hips. If you look at what's going on in the hips, that ability to rotate the hips through, if you don't have that position, you're just standing there playing soft toss. If all you're doing is the shoulder and then mitigating the contribution of the hips. So if you do baseball analysis, you would do, the hips and the shoulder. You'd only do the right side shoulder because you're only using the one side. This one's a counterbalance. It's not really the principal joint involved in the motion. But when you look at that, then you choose the exercises. So if we're doing that, what movement are we going to do that's going to be, in this position? Find an exercise that is going to mimic that. And there's some great resources. If you really want, probably one of the best resources that's out there to determine this, movement and the muscles involved in it, it's Frederick Delavier has a really great book out there that actually shows the exercises and actually will have a color graph of what muscles are involved in each different resistance exercise. And it's pretty cheap. You can actually pick it up for about $10.
What is that last name?
Delavier, Delavier. And he does a lot of them. He does, they're called, there's resistance anatomy for women, resistance anatomy for men, there's yoga anatomy. He does a whole series. They're actually really great books because they're very visual. It really does, when he shows you the colored graph of what muscles are being used in that movement, you can go, oh, okay. And then I go back and say, okay, my muscular analysis said, here's my agonist muscle. I can then recruit that. I was like, okay, how do I do that? And so just choose 2 exercises that would perform the development of the major agonist joints. So for baseball pitch, you choose 1 exercise that's going to develop the hips, or 2 exercises for the hips, 2 exercises for the shoulder, you're done. 2 for each joint. Sometimes you may be to the point where, in certain movements, if you're doing a basketball free throw, the legs may be, maybe the same, all the agonists involved would be doing like a squat leg motion or something like that. They're all going to be there. So it doesn't become as complex when you really think about what they're, because what I really want to force you to start thinking about is that muscles act in groups, they act in movements, rather than in, specific, oh, I'm isolating the biceps, or I'm isolating the triceps, or the anterior portion of the deltoid. It acts as a functional component of a movement. And so when you look at those movements and break it into what the contributing muscle recruitment in that movement is, it changes the development. Instead of thinking, oh, okay, well, I do bench press to get, my pecs. Well, now what does bench press actually do? So the bench press actually works on the pectoralis, the anterior deltoid, the triceps, serratus anterior, instead of just functioning on all just being pectoralis only. And do, your muscular analysis. So you can do this for pretty much any combined sports skill that you want. You can do it for, a corner kick in soccer, a throw in soccer. You can do it for, a volleyball serve. You can do it for, a chest pass in basketball. Your choice of what activity you want to do. I would recommend you probably start with something that's a little bit more of, a lesser grade movement than a baseball pitch. That's getting a little complex and a little bit involved. If you wanted to scale it down, something that you could do like shooting free throws is probably a good example of a movement where you can do an analysis, but there's not a lot of, contralateral movements. So I'm not doing left and right arm, doing something different. There's a lot of synchronous movements that they're doing the same thing. So if we're doing a soccer throw-in, it's going to be similar movements of the upper body and lower body. In that position, they're going to have, only the lower body's got, right and left legs doing alternate functions, but the upper body's acting the same. So your choice of those questions. Are we clear on what's going on with this?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay. I wanted to take some time and, go through this with you to really do this, because much of what we're going to be doing from now forward is going to be doing these analyses, doing these types of things, looking at what goes on with something like a chest press. What happens here? So if you're looking at, the position of a bench press, doing a bench press, we can come in here and actually replicate the bench press, and you can see, okay, what happens here? What are the wrist and hand functions? We're keeping that position of flexion throughout. Do we really change the position of the wrist and hand in a bench press as we come from the bottom position to the top position, up and down? Does it change? So part of what we're going to be doing is allowing you the opportunity to use what we have in here. We're going to use the physiology lab over in Urban Center on the second floor. We'll be meeting over there tomorrow. So we're going to do, the treadmill over there, so we can do some videotaping of the treadmill activities. But we can come in there. So if we look at this, what happens to the wrist and hand from doing a bench press? What are the wrist and hands performing in the bench press?
Grasp.
So they're grasping. So in that grasping position, we're holding the bar. But what else are we doing? Does that change as we come to the bottom position?
No. The weight changes.
So if we keep that in that position, the only thing that's changing in the wrist is we're going to have a slight change in the radial and ulnar deviation. Usually not a lot of change in the flexion and hyperextension position. So the sagittal plane doesn't really change much. So, in terms of roles of muscle, we would say that we're fixating in the sagittal plane by recruiting the flexors and extensor groups, because they're really restricting that range of motion, in that motion. So this chart really only talks about the agonist movement. But really, the agonists are only one small subsection of what's going on in the total movement. Because how do we maintain that hand position? Can we maintain the hand position through only the recruitment of the flexor groups? And I'll tell you this, for your sanity and mine both, list these in muscle groups, not in individual muscles. This is not anatomy and physiology. I don't need to see every single muscle labeled out. You can say wrist flexors, wrist extensors, or you can say lateral wrist flexors or medial wrist flexors.
That doesn't seem as scary then.
Yeah. I don't really, I mean, because
I mean, I know, I can do
you,
that.
for your purposes, can go through this on your own to develop your own anatomical understanding, but from a biomechanical standpoint, we talk in muscle groupings rather than naming each muscle. I mean, could you imagine how long a presentation would take if you were to go talk to someone and say, okay, now let's talk about what goes on in a bench press. And you started talking about every single muscle group. 10 minutes into the presentation, the audience is gonna be asleep. But if you walk in and say, okay, the wrist flexors, the wrist extensors do this. Elbow flexors, elbow extensors do this. Shoulder flexors, shoulder extensors, you don't have to go in there and detail them out, everything, unless there's some anomaly where you're looking at one particular aspect of the movement that we want that muscle group to be our focus because it's either a rehabilitative aspect or a developmental aspect. So if we're talking about, rotator cuff muscles, then we might want to separate those out and talk about how we would train the functions of the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres major, teres minor and subscapularis differentially in that function. We would then talk about each one of those as an individual function. But from a presentation standpoint, you would go in there and say shoulder flexors, horizontal abductors, or adductors, not, each of these individual. You would know that these are the muscles that are involved in performing that, but you don't have to list them out. So it's not going to be a spreadsheet that's going to be 400 columns by, 75 rows. It's going to be fairly simplistic. You'll have about 13 rows because that's your, and then you can list this information in one cell, just as they've done here. So this is a great example of how you can do that function of saying, okay, in the chest press we would do the descent phase. So this would be, in that, preparatory phase. The descent is going down, so what are we doing in the down phase? Then you look at that and say, okay, where's the joint? What's the function moving in that phase? And then what are the muscles creating that? And that's, so they've done in the up phase and the down phase separate, but you can see where you can do that. So you can just say, okay, wrist and hand function, boom, 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 where now the elbow, we're going flexion on the way down, extension on the way up, so you can see this is a great example of how you can list this out. And then you can just go through that and say, okay, not only this is the agonist function, but now what is the synergistic function in terms of stabilizing, what is fixating, what is opposing in terms of antagonistic groups. Because the antagonistic groups are really going to be the ones that are going to become resident when we get to the recovery phase of the movement. Rather than just saying, oh, okay, you're doing this, moving this, but how do we recover from that extension? What happens when we reach that terminal position? Do we just keep accelerating? Do we keep extending, or do we have a stop point? So I will load this into the your D2L slides as well. So there's a lot of these that we go through. So we're going to spend some time going through these over the remainder of this week, so we can do things like we did here with the push-ups, looking at those different things. We'll also do the functional movement screen so that we look at that and say, okay, what's happening here? What are we looking for? Are there activities where we expect to see something happening and not happening? And that technique that they show on the squat. Well, so now what's wrong with this squat on the right side here? He's doing what? So what we want to see in a good squat is we want to see the angle of the back mimicking the angle of the knee. So if you look at this, he's got far too much trunk motion, far too little hip and knee motion. So he's going to end up creating this motion where the predominance of the activity is going to be engaging his low back extensors rather than the musculature of his glutes, his hamstrings, and his knee extensors. So at that position, he's not really working through the goal of the exercise, which is to work on the triple extension. What do we mean by triple extension? The plantar flexion of the ankle joint, the extension of the knee joint, the extension of the hip. In fitness development, we talk about triple extension. It's the key to everything we do lower body, because it's that synergy and the integrated effect of that. Because if you think about, we don't separate out anything. When we extend our hips, the knees naturally extend with it. The ankles naturally plantar flex with it. So as we go down, we flex the knees, we flex the hips, we dorsiflex the ankles all at the same time. We don't have, we dorsiflex the ankles, then we flex the knees, then we flex the hips. If we did that, we would fall over because we don't have that ability to change all of those joints at once. The one thing you do see that he's got good position here is the bar maintains, a nice position over his base of support. But in that position, he's not achieving that bar position by using the joints appropriately. He's actually recruiting it by using too much low back.
What do you call that? The triple
extension.
Triple extension.
And this is needing some explanation. When we talk about ensuring that the shins remain as vertical, what does that mean in a squat? Because in this position, most of us would say, this is a vertical position of the shin, correct? Well, is this a vertical position of the shin? What they're talking about is a vertical position of the shin in the frontal plane. So we want to have the knees staying over top of the feet, not collapsing inward. So the one differential that I, would love to dialogue with this author is that they need to be a little bit more clear when they say that, because teaching someone to try to maintain a vertical position of their shins in a squat, imagine how difficult that's going to be. Because what happens is, as we talked about the other day, you're changing that leverage point. If you're moving this axis of rotation and you're going to have to stick your butt clear out to here, almost off the screen, to maintain that vertical position of the shins, where is that stress going? Right here in the knee. It's going to just exponentially raise the force product in the knee. Not to mention the fact that, you're going to usually accommodate that by shortening, and you're going to drop down into that position of, advancing that trunk flexion. So in order to advance that trunk flexion, now you're in a position, because if we don't move the trunk into flexion, what happens? We keep the shins vertical. We squat to the point where our butt goes way behind our heels. And the bar stays, again, if we try to maintain that congruency where the spine angle and the angle of the shin are the same, what happens? The bar is way back here, and you're going to fall over on your butt.
Yeah.
Because it's over our base of support, it's outside of that. So really poor description of the way they talk about this. There's some great stuff that's coming out. I know that, in my committee work with NSCA, they've actually developed some really great stuff that they're coming out with preparatory, testing exams where, let's see here, I can show you this.
Maybe they didn't finish typing the rest as vertical as possible.
Hmm?
Maybe they didn't finish typing the rest like as vertical as possible.
Why, or what reference they're putting for vertical? Yeah. So if I come over here and say,
Vertical is realistic as possible.
go back out. this is a great example of what they've done. This is a preparatory course where we're beta testing for them, you know, a teaching thing where they're teaching squat Olympic lifts for coaches, and it's a really great thing because they break the squat down. The squat has like, you know, probably about, you know, 20 minutes of video along with about 200 pages of information kind of about what you're trying to do and how to teach it, cueing mechanisms, and how to teach it. Why is this moving so slow? And the video alone that they put into it was about $20,000 worth of video time that they did. PowerPoint can't do this. I hope PowerPoint to open that.
Close something.
Here we go. So like if we wanted to teach the back squat progression. So you can see here in this position how
Can you turn the volume on your laptop, maybe?
I turned the volume on the laptop, it's not coming on. For some reason, it's just not. But again, and you can see how there's advancements. So we can start with body weight, the goblet, the front squat, back squat. So we have progressions. You know, the great thing that they've done here is they show how to build the exercises from a position where we can start with, you know, the fundamental movement that most individuals can accomplish, you know, towards, you know, something that's a little bit more advanced. But notice in the position here, in our front squat and our back squat, how the back position and the knee angles are the same. I don't know why. This is not, gotta be something. I think it's probably because it's not playing through. I don't have the audio connected up here. So it shows laterally how we want to stabilize, you know, the position over the base of support, so shoulder width. Again, like we talked about the other day in our posture analysis, you know, we're looking at where she is in her posture. And notice how her alignment stays fairly consistent in her posture. See in this position, it's a simultaneous movement. The extension of the knees, the hips, and the ankles all occur in the same sequence, not, you know, in a continuum. So notice where she's holding the weights here, keeping the center of mass of the resistance as close to the moving, rotational center of her gravity as possible. The nice thing about what they've done here with this video series is they've also set it up so they've got poor performance techniques. So one of the things we'll do is Thursday I'd like to take a chance have you guys look at the different things that are going wrong in these movements and see what you can come up with. So we'll try to bring that into play, Thursday, and spend some time really looking at what we see as errors, because that's an essential skill, is being able to identify not just good quality movements, but what is happening when we see something that kind of violates our expectations. Showing the different various group positions.
Does she ever hold that hand? Wrapped all- Does she ever hold her hand wrapped around it?
She's got it sitting at the fingertips.
Yeah. It's like kind of looks like she's gripping all of it.
Takes a lot of wrist strength in this position,
Yeah.
to control that. Okay, so what do we see in her right here? Watch her squat in the left video. What do you notice? A little imbalance in how?
Slightly sways back and forth.
There's a little lateral drift. And that's what we want people to start being able to recognize, is recognizing that lateral drift, because that's a position where it starts to indicate that imbalance in muscular strength on, right and left sides of the body. Because as we see this, that's telling us what's happening. Is it indicative of the fact that her agonists are weak? So is she weak in the propulsion phase of the movement? Does she lack the upward thrust?
No.
No. So why does she have that little lateral drift? And if we set it up in that position. Okay, so if we go through this and you watch this, you gotta watch closely, because she has a little, almost like wave-like motion in her body.
Every time.
Pretty consistently. And she does it again in the back swing too. This is a picture video clear, so I can't control it. So what you'll see is you watch her pelvis as she comes down. You know. There's a definitive position where in certain ranges of motion she tends to allow her pelvis to drift left and right.
Oh, it's in EAS, they're gonna be product placement?
This is the National Strength and Conditioning headquarters, so yeah, there's product placing everywhere. You know, this is their actual workout facility in their national headquarters in Colorado Springs. It's a really nice facility.
You've been out there?
I have to go back there. I went back there in March and April this year for committee work and was there last year. You know, it's probably about 7,000 square foot weight room, roll-up doors that go right out the garage doors into a 50-meter long, you know, field. It's a turf position. So watch especially the change from the bottom position coming up. Notice how she kind of drifts over a little bit from her right foot, kind of pushes that pelvis toward the left, and that transition from the down to up phase. And there's a little bit of a torquing rotation in the pelvis as well, which makes that transition phase. She's pushing something away from that right side, so it tells me that there's something going on in that right stabilizer. Because it's not the descent phase that's the problem, you know, it's not the ascent phase that's the problem, it's the transition position. And the transition position is usually where you're going to find the greatest level of vulnerability in the stabilizing musculature. You know, so it's not, because in the ascent phase, what's happening? We're basically succumbing to the fact of turning on the agonist and letting everything go. You know, once we start that in motion, it's just kind of doing that. But it's that position where we have to stabilize everything to change the inertia from a downward inertia to an upward inertia. We're changing the direction of motion. That's where we're going to see those vulnerabilities and those weaknesses in our stability. And that's the areas where fundamentally we're going to find our greatest level of injury risk. You know, because it's not in the ability to propel our body forward that creates the high level of injury risk. It's when we stop or change direction. So if you were to have her put those vertical yellow lines on there again, instead of putting them on the right side, they want to put them on the left side video so you can see, you know, she has a little bit of, you know, watch her right shoulder as she goes down and stays a little bit higher and a little bit posterior of her left shoulder. A little bit rounding of that left shoulder forward as she gets to the bottom position. So there's something in that spinal stabilization from a rotational aspect that's manifesting. So this is telling you if she's going to run, she's going to have that pattern. So she's probably, you know, got an asymmetry in her strength development from something that she does predominantly left-sided movement. Like if she was a pitcher or something like that, she does something that's a forced movement that she does with her dominant side that she usually doesn't counterbalance with, you know, non-dominant activities. So you'll find this a lot in people who have those, you know, isolateral movement patterns, like, you know, soccer players that kick a lot with their dominant foot. You know, they're going to exhibit that pattern where they're going to have that rotational disconnect. You know, she doesn't show it as much here because you can't see the positioning of the right shoulder, but, you know, the beauty of having the doorway behind her is it shows the verticality of the position, you know, so you can kind of look at that phasing. And she really shows it here in the front squat when she's got the weight. See how she's kind of got that almost like, you know, side drifting. You know, it tells me that she's got some issue going on with glute medius, glute minimus. It manifests more at the beginning of the downward position where she changes from stationary here as we go through the different grip positions again. So she's gonna kind of look at S-like motion. If you watch her spine. Especially if you watch this posterior, if you're watching it from the back, you'd see her having create almost an S-like fashion. So, see a little lateral drift.
It's dipping just a little bit. The bar dips down just a little bit.
Yep. The bar is dipping down to show that she's changed the elevation of the pelvis, the elevation of the shoulders. But you notice how she's kind of sinking into that left leg. You know, her position, she drifts farther towards her left. So if you were able to freeze frame it right there and do the analysis, she's actually closer to her left foot in the bottom position than she is in the top. You know, which that's just describing right there an imbalance in the lateral stabilizers. You know, so this is why it really helps to go through something like this and look at the different activities, because really what we're discovering is, you know, an area where what on the surface looks like a very good technique, you know, that when you get to slowing it down and really looking at it, we want to make sure that we understand how can we help her, because it's not going to be, you know, training her, you know, muscles that are involved in the drive phase of the ascent portion of the squat, or even in the, you know, controlling the eccentric motion of the drop of the squat. It's going to be in that position of stabilizing that bottom position. So, you know, that's where, you know, some of those fundamental movements where we're going to do, you know, the pelvic stability exercises that you could do, you know, where, you know, you may want to look at doing those stabilization in that transition phase. So doing something where she's in a position of holding that there, and you could do, one of the ways we can train this is to use the TheraBand and hold her so that we're pulling her into a position where her hips are out of phase with what she's trying to do, and she's going to recorrect that position before she can transition upward. So you start with a very light lateral distraction, you know, with an elastic band or something like that, where you pull her away from her position, because, you know, if she's naturally drifting towards her left foot, you want to pull her towards her left foot. You want to make her body proprioceptors kick in and say, hey, wait, why am I being pulled there? I need to offset that by pushing my body back towards the opposing side. So we would actually pull her into her drift, and then she's going to start developing that understanding that you do that. So we pull her into that drift, and then we watch to see how much she's changing over that period of time, and especially in that bottom position, really with that transition phase when the top of the thigh reaches parallel with the floor, right here and to there. And so that bottom position is really when you want to apply that tension. You know, not enough that we're going to destabilize her, and not enough in a position where, you know, these plastic, you know, clear plates are the same as the little 5-pound plates we have over here. They're just, you know, see-through, so it really gives you that. But you can see now, watch on the right side. Watch what's happening here. Notice how you start to see the bar kind of turning. You can start to see how the bar turns forward on the left side, moving forward. That's the representation of what's going on in her pelvis on the left video. So when she's got that little, you know, almost windshield wiper effect of, you know, lateral left-right motion, starts to become a torquing motion on the right side when she loads posteriorly. She doesn't have that as much when she loads anteriorly. When she was in the front squat position, she didn't have that rotation as much. So leads you to think that there's something going on in the posterior kinetic chain with the lumbar rotators that's creating that motion. So you can really start to assess and go through that whole function and say, what is going on here that needs to be addressed beyond just the surface description? Because, you know, if we only look at it from the surface element, you know, that's all we're ever really going to see, you know. But if you dig deeper, sorry, you know, we can go through the questions and answers, you know, so you're looking at the common errors. They go through a lot of the different common errors and what happens.
Is this on the website? Is this the beta?
This is the beta test. It's actually really well done. I mean, the material that they cover with this is exceptional because they're trying to create material that allows for more than just program design for their practitioners. That this really takes someone at your guys' entry level of experience and presents something that, hey, this is what you really want to look for in a concise package, and here's something that you can do to get, kind of a preparatory, certificate rather than going through like the USA weightlifting certificate to say, oh, now I've been certified in USAW for, the technique and resistance training exercises. This is kind of an introductory level that you would do for, beginning practitioners. Really great opportunity for people to get in on the ground floor, learn how to apply those things from a functional progression instead of, coming in there and saying, okay, what do we do now for these people who are like, because the industry is showing that the majority of people come in and have really poor understanding of good quality technique. And one of the things that we're going to see when we do the 7-point movement screens, probably either Thursday or the last week of the term, you're really going to see what happens when you do the 7-point movement screens. It starts to be able to determine what are we looking at. And so much of our responsibility, much of what I want you guys to learn from this class is how to determine, how to, create that, really, discriminating viewpoint, the discriminating observational techniques where when we're looking at something, we want to be able to assess what is the expected norm and how is this, either achieving that expected norm or missing the mark. Because that's really, from a coaching standpoint, that's what really separates good coaches from bad coaches, beyond just, how they coach the athlete. But, if you want to be a good tactical coach, it's being able to understand those small little subtle variables that really make the difference. It's that pitching coach who knows the difference between, the pressure you apply in the index and middle finger on the pitch and how much it changes the effect of the movement on the ball. Those people who really separate themselves in their field are those ones that have that detailed perspective. Instead of just coming in there and seeing this and going, okay, yeah, I see a squat. But do I see a squat? And, so when you start looking at YouTube videos and you see people who are doing pull-ups and, are they tracking normally or do they, have kind of a side-to-side swaying motion as they're doing that? Do they rise level or do their shoulders tilt and they pull up on an oblique plane? Those are things you want to be able to look for and really, address in what we are looking for here. So, spend some time going over these videos. I will try to upload the remainder of the videos that we have in D2L. I'm going to go here for uploading the analysis of movement thing. So let's go back. Okay. So the analysis of movement slide is on there. Okay, so when we do this, now we go back and look at videos like, these are going to be a little bit dark. So last term we videotaped doing the throwing, the striking, the kicking motions, and we did a videotape of a number of participants in the class. So what you'll see is we have, different levels of skill development and different things to look at. end. So if we come in here and we look at the throwing motion, we want to look at, so what do we notice about this throwing motion? Okay, so he exhibits the preparatory phase, correct? What's his big deficit? Watch his hips.
Looks stiff.
Very stiff. What we want to see in a throwing motion is what's the sequence of movements? What's the proper sequence of movements in a throwing motion? If we're thinking biomechanically, how do we progress? We want to start at the ground and work our way up. So it's that position where we create that rigid movement position. So right there, he's starting into his preparatory position. Once his foot hits the ground, we want to see everything start to work. So it's going to be delay the upper body, let the lower body work. But he's almost creating everything at the same time. So he's got we would refer to this as a very immature movement pattern. He doesn't have a very mature movement scope. We can see, almost, a very similar but very distinctively different, very minimal rotation.
Steps to the side too.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a lateral force production instead of a rotational force production. So his plane of movement is off. Again, the sequence is out of phase. Because you want to see a little bit more lag time between the hips moving and then the recruitment of you almost want to see it be like a wave-like motion building through the body for that real efficient production. Very, very poor throwing mechanics from these participants. Let me see here. Notice this one. Watch this one again. Notice the release point. So we see good torquing motion of the upper body, but notice his release point. Right there. So he's releasing this at the back edge of his front leg. Watch the ball.
Yeah.
It goes upward more than forward. But also notice how short his follow through is. Doesn't have any follow through. None of the forces absorbed in his torso. It's all absorbed in the arm. Notice the lengthening of the preparatory phase. Notice the sequence of timing between the foot strike and the counterbalance forward thrust with the leading arm. Good example here of rotational inertia using maximum recruitment. See how he's using his torso and his legs to create the motion before he loads the arm. And the release point is occurring. The release point is in a very good position right there because it's at the forward edge of this base of support. So usually in a projectile position, this is the position where we're at our maximum velocity. When the limb is over the leading edge of the forward position. Anything after that, we're traveling faster, but we lack the recovery capacity. So now notice what he does with how he's using his arm first and then allows his torso and leg to absorb some of that recovery phase.
He's the only dude who brought his back foot forward too.
Yeah, the rest of them just stop. So we see here kicking motions. See a really good plant position here for a kick. So he starts with a forward lean, approaching the ball. And once his left foot hits the ground, watch what happens. See how he's transitioning the torso? So then now the weight starts to go posterior and he's going to have, once that heel strikes, he's almost going to be in a backward leaning position with the torso. Winding up the leg. Decreasing the rotational distance. Hits the ground early. Loses a lot of energy right there. We call this a whiff. Because notice if you look right here, he contacted the ground right here. And that's all the rubber material. So he hit almost a foot behind the ball. He has good preparation, but the execution leaves something to be desired. But notice here there's a good balance on the recovery, using the forward arm to help keep the balanced position, so he's keeping that over that forward position of the front foot to keep his center of mass there until his body can catch up with it. In this position now, notice he'll drop that arm once his body mass, center of gravity, gets over his base of support. Because he doesn't need that arm out there extended once he creates that balance point. So as part of the recovery phase is keeping that in connection as well. What do we notice about that one? A lot of energy going into it.
It's a big leap.
That is a big leap. But notice how in this position he's almost a little premature getting his leg. Watch his trail leg. His trail leg starts to swing forward before he gets that foot plant. So he's losing a lot of that elastic energy that you can create in the torquing motion of the lower body. Because you want to think right here is where you would want to start initiating that transition forward. And then to almost slow his leg swing down. A big leap caused him, at least in the position here, you see he's got good contact position. Doesn't strike the ground a foot behind the ball.
It's a little.
He's not really striking the ball as effectively because of his change in position. So he's almost, kind of almost like chipping at this ball. His intention was to create a little bit more upward twist. You'd almost want to have, if you were to truly measure this, you would want to have a target where they're aiming at so you can tell the difference from where they're trying to hit. So if you were to film this, you would go out on the concrete wall and you'd put a target up there, whether they're going high or low, and watch the difference in what happens with them mechanically with their body mass as they do that. Because notice what's happening here is he's got a really abbreviated, took a giant leap and a very short follow through.
Looks like he's trying not to go ball line.
Still dissipating a lot of rotational movement from that giant leap that he had approaching the ball.
It kind of seemed like one side was trying to catch up with the other.
Yeah, there's definitely a sequence lag between the sides of his body. It's like there's two arguments going on here, and they're having a disconnect.
Like his planting foot was really passive and his
It's
swinging foot was really aggressive.
then you see. And so we wanted to see a posterior view. Oh, slow kid. So instead of just having all a side view, you can see here a little more of the rotational components involved. Which is planned for way behind the ball. He's going to hit the top of that ball when he swings through. So it gives you a different perspective when you look at, it goes off from a lateral perspective and a posterior perspective of the movement. Slice. Notice when he's coming through, watch the position as he gets right at the contact position. Now watch as he comes through the ball. You would ideally like to see him swing his left leg straight down this white line, but watch what happens. So it's kind of coming outside in. And then watch what happens to the ball. He strikes it not at the center of its mass, but at the point off center. And watch instead of the ball flying straight down the white line, what happens to it as it slices off against the ball, concrete wall.
This follow through is basically the same way the ball went to start off right and then finish to the left.
Yeah, he's got a kind of almost figure eight follow through. So now there's a good position for a foot plant, even with his target. not behind or ahead. Notice how he's really wound up. I mean, he's got a lot of energy in the torso coming through. It would help if he doesn't strike a foot behind the ball.
Do you think golfers watch a lot of film like this?
Yeah, I will get to those. Here we go.
Oh, nice. Do you know a lot about golf? I know nothing.
Yeah. So, what do we see with Dan here? Watch as he goes through his
Hitting
swing.
a tennis ball?
Yes, he's hitting the tennis ball because we didn't want to kill people with a real golf ball out of the field. Hit that towards the walkway to hop the ball. Yeah, we'd be in trouble. Tennis balls, they don't travel as far and they don't hurt as much. If we were hitting real golf balls, we would be going this way, hitting them towards the freeway. And even then, it would be duck and cover. So the one thing you see here is, notice everything here is weights all on his back foot, so he's going to have a really poor weight shift. You know, he's got high left shoulder, low right shoulder, poor posture, approaching the ball. So the idea in golf is we want to act kind of like we're coiling a spring. So we're trying to rotate everything around that fixed axis. So watching this position, what's happening, his shoulders are sliding up, turning. He's still sliding up, turning. His chest is still facing his target for the most part, getting a minimal amount of shoulder rotation. In this position, ideally for a golf swing, we'd want to see left shoulder behind the ball. Look where his hips are. His hips are square to his target. I mean, there's no change from his initial position. So in that, there's really going to be no torque developed from the lower body. So he's got a very, very characteristic, amateur swing. So everything he's developing is upper body only. So this is the guy when he gets to the golf course and tries to add distance to the ball. He just, he's going to throw his back out. He's going to feel it because he's going to have this humongous lateral shift. He's going to try to muscle his way through the ball instead of using the mechanics of the golf swing to his advantage. Now, unfortunately, in this class, he had the best golf swing of the whole group. Because he actually stayed down through the contact position. This is the same tile floor that you see in the entryways here that we laid down on the field. One person actually hit the tile and threw the tile past the golf or the tennis ball as he hit it.
Would the lack of rotation in his hips kind of account for his shoulder differential?
Well,
When
the
he
lack
was
of
down because he's not
no,
moving his forward.
he's doing that because it's more of the lack of his positional balance.
Oh.
So when he's addressing that, you want to think about in a golf position, you're going to have a slightly lower position with your right shoulder than your left shoulder if you're a right-handed golfer because your hand's lower.
Right.
So you're going to have that a little bit lower position, but you don't want your spine because what's happening is he's collapsing his spine this way. So instead of thinking about using his spine as an axis of rotation, it's almost like folding like it's, the mini blinds that stack upon each other. Instead of acting as a rotational function, it's now acting as a lateral compression, you know. So he does a lot of lateral compression because he doesn't rotate his hips, he's doing this lateral sway with his hips. And let's see, what else do we get here? So, let's see, Christian.
Baseball player.
Is that fun?
This is a classic beginner move. So you see everything kind of in this position where it's the looky loo. I'm gonna start my golf swing by looking up. My first move away from the ball is literally stand up away from the ball. My hands start to move backward. But now, once I reach that point, I start to stand up. But I swung for the fences.
Stay down.
Stay down that time, but, you know, only swung with the arms. You know, it's like, for some reason people think about a golf swing, they don't realize that it's a full body swing. They think, oh, I just gotta use my arms only. Well, if you watch them swing a baseball bat, they don't swing arms only. You know, it's one of the most, you know, confounding things. You know, having taught people to play golf for 20 years, it's like, it's not that difficult if you just get out of your own way, you know. But in this position, it's like, this is what you classically see. A lot of smash and grab. You know, I wish I still had all of the old VHS tapes that I had, because they were classic. We used to videotape the students as they were learning to, you know, improve their golf swing. And, oh, God bless Norman. I miss him to this day. We had an indoor driving range over in the Stock Center. We had the mats out there, and we had this guy named Norman. You know, he's a lovable character, and he thought he was a class clown, but he's like trying to reenact the scene from Caddyshack, where it's like, you know, Masters rookie. He's out there going through the whole dialogue in the videotape. Takes this massive swing, hits the mat, holds the mat over top of the ball. The ball goes nowhere, but Norman's looking off at the distance in there, and it's just like, the whole class is roaring. You know, I mean, there's one guy that fell down. He was laughing so hard, and it's just like, and Norman looks down, and he's like, "Free." I was like, only Norman would think that. You know, so it's, oh yeah, you got Trenton. This is a great one.
Okay, have a good tip.
This is like chopping wood.
Yeah.
But there's no forward. Everything's staying. You know, he's like rotating back, but his weight's behind it. You know, instead of having his weight at his leading edge of his base of support, so he's transferring all that energy, he's losing much of his energy. You know, when you see where he's at here, watch how he doesn't get an effective transfer of energy into the ball. He's got a good coiling motion, so this downswing is actually pretty good until right there. What's happening? What happens in this movement that's creating a disconnect? Watch how he's kind of got the hips in motion.
He's bending over.
He's bending over. And he's creating that all there. So he's got there, but watch right there. It's like he's squatting to take a poo, and his hips stop moving. There's nothing. It's like, because now he's like trying to fold into that position. Instead of continuing to rotate, he went from rotational to all lateral. You know, so this is now lateral, drop of the shoulders with a rotation of the spine, but it's a tilting motion instead of a turning motion. And his hips started again after he made contact with the ball. So what do we see in this one? Good address position. Notice how his shoulders are just slightly below parallel. Takeaway is a nice one-piece unit. This is what we always teach you in golf, is to look for the Y. You know, so he's got a good takeaway. But what happens right there is he stops hip motion. The biggest mistake most people make in the golf swing is they don't think about it's turning rather than tilting, because they see it being in the phase of a lateral movement. Most of the time they view it, they think about it as a lateral movement, not as a rotational movement. So you look at what happens here. His hips have completely stopped turning. And he starts to tilt, make it a lateral tilting of the shoulders rather than that turn of the hips. You know, he is the anti-John Daly swing though, because his swing position is going to be short of parallel. So ideally in this position, he's actually got a really nice position here. He's got a high takeaway, a good full arm extension, because the idea is to create the largest rotational arc, which creates the greatest linear to angular, or angular to linear conversion for acceleration. But watch what happens with it. You know, he pretty much just loses everything. Because it's like, okay, now we just like slowly, you know, there's no torquing, there's no bending of the shaft. If you were to watch someone like, you know, Tiger Woods here, you'd see that shaft bent in that position, because the weight of the club is all down here. So it's going to actually bend. That's the flex point of the shaft. It's usually right about here. You can see that huge flex point start there, and that's where the majority of the torque and energy in the golf swing comes from, the utilization of that mechanics. But what do we see with Cameron here? The hips stopped. I think it's the same thing we saw with Trenton. You don't see any rotational change in the hips. And it just becomes like swinging the arms through. Drop my arms into the swing. And
legs are like this bedlock.
yeah, you know, it's very stiff. I mean, even into his post contact position, you see that same position. There's not much changes. You look at the line here, stays equal distance from his thigh for about 80% of his downswing. But what you don't see here is, without taking this into an analysis enough, because even, look at that, I mean, he's loaded and everything, instead of being rotated through into his forward leg, he's still kind of keeping that weight back towards his posterior side, more towards the right. But if you watch this at full speed, notice how he kind of almost decelerates into the ball. There's like the downswing, and then it's like once he makes contact, he tries to scoop, you know, and push the ball rather than strike. Oh God, I wish I had Charles Barkley. Pre, you know, is, you know, trying to get help with the swing after, because it's like, you know, I mean, we could probably try to YouTube it.
You can definitely find it on YouTube.
Oh, it's hilarious. And I heard him the other day say he literally plays every day. I'm like, my back hurts just watching him play once.
Cause some compilation.
Oh, here we go. Let's go back here. Before and after. Jones Park has a new golf swing. Watch the club. Hey, look in there. This is just beyond my mechanical description.
Is this the one that
This is the after.
Yeah,
That still is warm up. Because he's got this thing where he starts down and then he stops, and then it's like,
goes.
and it's like. This is what you call paralysis by analysis. And this guy has overanalyzed his swing to the point where he just doesn't have any fluidity. He's questioning every detail of his movement because it's all inside his head.
That's,
That's one of his best swings he makes with one hand.
yeah.
Because if you watch some of the other ones he does, it's just like, oh my God. You know. This was great when they did this on the Golf Channel. And they analyzed Charles Barkley's golf swing over a period of weeks. And I was just like, it's like he's having a spastic attack. It's like, it's like, what are you doing? You can notice the slight difference. Yeah, there's a big difference. Because he actually maintains momentum. The worst problem was he did all that, and then he went back to the before.
Yeah.
After spending 12 weeks working with the world's, top coach, he goes right back to where he was before. What is this? Oh, that's- What is this? I mean, the world's worst result is not the world's worst swing. This is not keeping his head still. And then here's the Mark golf is just a good long spoiled. We got a little real estate golf, left, right, left, right.
Oh. It's game killer. There it is. No, you can't make this putt.
Okay, Reynolds. Okay, middle Charles. That golf swing is just classic. This one's fun. Where actually hits the ball backwards. On purpose.
Kind of ironic. The shirt says Barclays.
This is incredible. Just think about how much balance.
Oh my gosh, no way.
Watch it.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Wow.
He didn't hit that forward, he hit that backward. Wow. And still landed like 4 feet from where he was. Like, we're not worthy. Watching, and literally, if you watch these pros, I mean, they're on a whole other world. I mean, I went and watched years ago when they used to have the Fred Meyer Challenge back in the day when it was like Jack Nicholson, Arnold Palmer, and those guys. I mean, I saw, pros standing out there putting on a green, and they had this downhill putt, and they missed probably 80% of them just left. Arnold Palmer walks up to the sand wedge, takes one hand, just taps the thing, and it goes in 25 feet. And you're like, he's replicating the guy under the tree thing, and he's standing back, he's 150 yards away. He plays it around the tree, lands it once, takes 2 bounces, and rolls within 2 feet of the cup. And you're like, and you couldn't even see him. All you saw was his ball just squirt out from behind this giant tree. It's like, okay, you guys are ridiculously talented. So yeah, we'll spend some time. We'll actually go do some of this stuff. We'll get the camera out and go do this. So tomorrow we're going to meet over in the Urban Center. It's the second floor. If you go into the second floor, take the elevator and go all the way around to the back corridor. It's facing on 5th Avenue. It's on the back side over there. It's called the Swoboda Exercise Physiology Laboratory. So there's the computer lab that's on the north wall. You keep going around. It's on the east wall.
Can you put those instructions on detail?
Yes. I just emailed to everybody.
Is the first class still here?
Yeah. We'll meet over there at noon. That'll give time for the people here to get over there and everything else. All right. So does this help give you a little bit more perspective of what we're trying to achieve when we're looking at doing video analysis, things like that, because we'll actually load your stuff into the software here. We can see here, do strength analysis. Hopefully we can get, the week after I get back, hopefully we'll have the field completed. I think they're supposed to complete the renovation of the fields. I think they're supposed to complete it, weather permitting, they're supposed to complete it this week. And they're getting the perfect weather for it. It's supposed to be dry for 5 days. So that they can do all the infield.
So we won't meet here on this
We're gonna meet.
Not
You can
here
go there
on
and yes. Yeah. That way it just gives time for we got half the kids, half the people in this class are in the first class, and so we'll kind of all come over there together.
Thank you.